In the town where I was born lived a man who sailed to sea, and he told us
It was the late 1950s in England, and the American rock and roll sensation just hit England. Teenagers shake, rattle, and roll to the music of Elvis, and the teenage dance moves mimic their social and political moves as well. British teens wanted independence from their parents and the right to freely express their thoughts and actions. Like many teenagers, John, Paul, George, and Ringo were influenced by the rock and roll movement and later communicated this unrest through their music. All of the members of the Beatles came from Liverpool, and they were from hardworking families. Even though most of the boys that made up the band, the Beatles, met each other in their teenage years, it took years to form the band the Beatles. John Lennon was inspired to pursue music by listening to Elvis, Buddy Holly, and the Everly Brothers on the radio. John then decided to put a band called the Quarrymen. John recruited some serious musicians into the band with acquaintance Paul McCartney and Paul's friend George Harrison. All of the boys rocked the guitar. They were in desperate need of new band members with other musical talent. John convinced his friend Stuart Sutcliffe to play bass in the band, and they recruited a drummer, Pete Best. With the new direction of the band and new members, they wanted a new name. They came up with Johnny and the Moondogs, the Silver Beatles, and finally the Beatles. While the Beatles had their first international tour in Hamburg, Germany, Stuart Sutcliffe fell in love with Astrid Kircher. Astrid was an aristocratic artist who influenced their image. She encouraged the band to cut their hair the same, dress more flamboyant, and have more of a rock and roll vibe. In 1962, this image caught the attention of Brian Epstein, who was the owner of North End Music Stores. Brian knew that once this band would be famous and demanded to be their manager. But before the Beatles could set foot in their recording studio, the studio executives decided to replace their drummer. John and Paul pursued Richard Ringo Starkey to join their band. Stuart decided to sneak off to Germany and to get married to Astrid and quit the band.
in our yellow submarine.
In the fall of 1962, at the recording studio of Abbey Road, the Beatles recorded their first single, Love Me Do. This recording was a big hit. Within a matter of weeks, they were back in the recording studio performing Please, Please Me. It's said that the release of this song was the world's real introduction to the Beatles. Shortly after this release, British rock and roll had arrived to the United States, and the Beatles paved a way for other British bands, like the Rolling Stones and Van Morrison. In the mid-1960s, their songs and lyrics at this stage grew out of their love for life and humanity. Their music and lyrics resonated with their audience, for their audience was struggling with conforming to society and the government. At this time, they released the album Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, then Yellow Submarine, and soon after came the Magical Mystery Tour. Most of the Beatles' song and lyrics were composed by Paul and John. It was unique for the bands during the 1960s to write their own music. Most bands hired professional writers. The Beatles also used experimental techniques that were later musical breakthroughs and revolutionized music to date. In the late 1960s, the Beatles embraced being the spokesman for love and peace. All in all, the Beatles released 13 albums. They incorporated different genres in their music and helped change the face of music with their innovative recording techniques, creative song choice and lyrics, and flamboyant fashion. The Beatles are one of the most successful and influential bands in the history
Lived
of
a
music.
man who sailed to sea, and he told us of his life.